Hi class. I want to give a response to some of the questions that have come up regarding height, the elephant and the rider. Two questions in particular. One is about free will and moral responsibility. That is, if I have, and if all humans have, very natural elephant-like responses to our world that cause us to make moral judgments, to do certain things, right, to act on those intuitions, and then reason mostly comes after the fact, doesn't that mean I'm not really free, right? I'm acting immediately, and then my conscious self is not really making the choice. The choice has already been made. The conscious self is kind of sifting through to help me feel like I've got a justification for what I did or for the judgment I made. If that were the case, you really wouldn't be free at all. You would be like most animals without free will. We just happen to be conscious, have language and other things that mask or cover over the fact that we're really determined. But this is not the case. We have freedom because we are aware that we have these feelings and intuitions. We do have the ability to slow down. Haidt talks about links 5 and 6 in the social intuitionist model, where my reasoning can actually begin to reshape my judgments and my actions and my intuitions. So I do think we have free will. I think rationally I have veto power. So my elephant has a desire, I have an intuition, but I can keep myself from acting on that, right? So we do have freedom, but I don't think we have as much free will as we like to think. I think a lot of what I do in the day is my habits, my patterns, my desires, and I wake up, I get my coffee ready, I go through my routine, I drive to work, I check my email. I'm not really making a conscious decision in all of that, right? But I can make conscious decisions throughout my day, and I think the more I slow down and am really reflective, I can actually increase the number of free decisions I make during my day. But I have less of it than I think. This might be good. The less freedom I have, the less freedom other people have, I actually begin to have more compassion for myself, more compassion for other people, more empathy. I still hold myself responsible. I still hold other people responsible, but less so. Instead of me immediately becoming judgmental on other people, oh, they're such a bad mom, they're such a bad dad, why would they do that? They're so selfish. I find myself thinking, I don't know what their day has been like. I don't know how their elephant is responding. I don't know how their brain is functioning. I have to slow my judgment down, have more empathy and compassion for these people and for myself, because the amount of freedom I think I have is much less than I used to, right? Enough to be responsible, but not so much that I lose compassion and empathy, if that makes sense. Another question that's come up is about the elephant rider and our sinful nature. Is my elephant rider situation, is the social intuitionist model that describes my immediate reaction and then my desire to justify my judgments and behaviors after the fact, is that really just a product of a sinful nature? This opens a very complicated issue that would require sort of a theological discussion about what is our sinful nature and all of that. I would just say that we can't attribute the sin model or the elephant rider the sinful nature, because much of the time it leads us to good conclusions. Many of my elephant reactions to things are appropriate. It's good to be afraid in scary situations and for my elephant to warn me, to give me warning signs of that danger, right? There are often times when we hear someone in distress, our elephant reacts immediately. We need to help, right? We need to help that child in distress. We need to help that person on the side of the road. My elephant often leads me to do good things, Christ-like things, noble things. But then there are other times when my elephant does not respond as Christ would want me to respond, and in those moments I need to resist. But I don't want you to think of all of your elephant responses are bad or sinful or counter to the gospel. That's just not true. We are a complicated species. Humans are really complicated. And my elephant gets things right a lot, and that's great, but not always, right? So please do not associate the elephant with sinfulness and your rider being like holy or good. That's not true. It's a little bit more complicated than that. A second thing, and this I won't go into too much, but I care deeply about science, and I have been convinced, for instance, of the truth of macroevolution. I believe that God has used macroevolution as the mechanism to create diversity on life, the diversity of life we see on the planet. For some of you, that's controversial. I totally get that. There's no reason that you have to accept evolution, right? I happen to. I think science is providing more and more and more evidence for the truth of macroevolution, especially since we've mapped the human genome and the genome of other species and things. The argument's gotten stronger. But it raises some real interesting questions for sinful nature. Because typically we track sinful nature back to Adam and Eve, the first sin, eating the fruit in the garden. From that moment, all of their children will inherit a sinful nature from them. But evolution, and predominantly population genetics, makes a literal interpretation of Genesis 1, 2, and 3, a literal interpretation of Adam and Eve, very difficult. If macroevolution is true, then it seems that Adam and Eve, as the first couple to give birth to the entire human race, is not the case, that we would have to give a more theological interpretation of Genesis 1, 2, and 3. And then the question is, well, then where does my sinful nature come from? If I can't trace it back to a literal Adam and Eve eating of the fruit, why do I have one? Because clearly I have a proclivity to do things I shouldn't do. I desire things I shouldn't desire. One answer might be, most of our sinful desires come from our animal past. So I have lustful desires, right? But that is also found in nature, right? Promiscuity exists in non-human animals. I have a desire to be very protective and defensive of myself, my family, right? It can make me very competitive, very violent. But we see some of those same instincts in non-human animals. Much of my sinful desires, those things that are natural to me, exist in non-human animals. And maybe that's where my sinful desire comes from. And the call of Christ is to transcend my animal self and to become more fully human. Less animal, more human, more like Christ. And that with grace and the Holy Spirit equipping me, we can in fact pursue holiness and transcend our animal selves, becoming less animal, more human. I find that to be an interesting way to merge science and theology. For some of you, this is not interesting at all because evolution is not interesting and all that. That's great. Some of you, though, are really scientific-minded, and that might be something to explore, and I'd be happy to talk more about it via email or over the phone, anything like that. So hope you're having a great day, and I will see you online.